So the communication professor James Winan said many years ago, a speech is not an essay on its hind legs. And this speaks to a deeper truth, which is speaking and writing are just different. And obviously we all know this at some level, but speaking is an oral event, whereas reading written script, is visual, or in the case of Braille, tactile. And these are very similar mediums, but we need to, if we're going to study public speaking well, we need to understand the differences so we can be good public speakers. So what I want to talk about very briefly is just identifying what some of these differences between speaking and writing are, examining some of these differences in practice, and then analyzing these differences so that we can start thinking about how to become better speakers. So let's begin with some of the differences. At a very broad level, writing is learned. Okay, you did not come out of the womb knowing how to write. Okay, you didn't come out of the womb pen in hand. A lot of very injured mothers were that the case. Okay, you were not born with the knowledge of writing. You had to learn it. Now, that's very different from speech. Speech is acquired. Humans are going to speak. If you look at the Steven Pinker book, The Language Instinct, over years of evolution, we have just developed language. We will engage in speech, or we will at least have the capacity for language. That's going to happen. Writing, you have to be taught. That explains why we have illiteracy. There's nothing inherently wrong with someone who doesn't know how to write. They haven't been taught this unique form of communication. Okay? So writing is learned. By the same token, writing is invented. There was a time before writing systems. There might well be a time after writing systems, right? We know that probably about 6,000 years ago in Sumer, we have the development of the first writing system, okay? But it's an invention. In many ways, you can think of writing akin to the internet. Okay? Someone came up with it. It has inventional aspects to it. You have to learn it for one, but it's an invention. Okay, it's something we've come up with as humans, but it's not inherent. And consequently, writing is not ubiquitous. So there are probably just under 7,000 languages in use today in the world. Slightly more than half of those are totally unwritten languages. There is no guarantee that a language is going to turn into a writing system. Okay? Now, these are very broad differences, and these can have impacts in terms of how we do public speaking. Certainly, they can have sociocultural or historical impacts. If you're interested, you can go back to the seminal work by Walter Ong in Literacy and Orality, and he's looking at what happened to cultures as they moved from a primarily oral culture into a mixed culture of oral and writing. Okay? Ong was influenced by the famous media critic Marshall McLuhan, who famously said, the medium is the message. Okay? The basic idea there is the medium by which the message is transmitted is going to affect the nature of the message and certainly the perception of the message. And when it comes to standing up and delivering a presentation, our medium is speech. And we may not think about that, but these are different mediums, speaking and writing. So what I'd like to do now is examine what some of these differences are like in practice. So I have some volunteers I'm going to bring up here in just a moment. And we're running a basic experiment. So I've asked one volunteer to read a piece of text that I wrote. Okay? And I've got another volunteer who I asked merely to talk to us about why he chose to come to the University of Washington. Okay? So the person reading just got the script. It's a very short script. Maybe 10 minutes ago, the person who is going to tell you about why he chose UW learned of the prompt maybe about 15 minutes ago. So it's not sort of overly planned. That would sort of undermine the purpose of this demonstration of this experiment. So let me go ahead and bring them on now. So first off is Heather Wise, who's going to speak about. Heather, can I get you over here on this one? We've got Heather Wise, who's just a recent grad from the University of Washington, who's going to read this script that I wrote. And then we have Danny, and just go ahead and say it so I don't have to screw it up.
Stofflith.
Stofflith. I had it right when he told me before, and I know Danny, but the name gets me. I apologize. And who's just going to be talking about why he chose the University of Washington. So Heather, whenever you're ready.
When looking into colleges, I, like most students, was concerned with picking the college that was a good fit for me as a student and a college that would allow me to learn the most for a post-college career. I applied to a number of different colleges using the same basic criteria: affordability, academic reputation, and location of the country. After receiving a number of acceptance and rejection letters, I was left with a small pool of colleges from which to select. I ended up choosing the University of Washington because of its solid academic reputation, which was recently reflected in a number of national surveys. The fact that it was in Seattle didn't hurt. I'm happy with my choice, and I look forward to a challenging and rewarding period as a full-time student and scholar.
Thank you. Danny?
So when I first heard this question, I thought it was really interesting because it seems to focus on the university itself. Why did I choose the University of Washington? And that obviously that was a question that I went through when I was looking at, I'm a graduate student, so I was looking at graduate schools. I was deciding between a few options. And the reasons that I chose the university weren't because of the academics or because of the faculty or because of the average GPA or all these things that probably should have been a lot more important to me than they actually were. I actually chose this place because of, after visiting it, I fell in love with it because of the surrounding environment. The University of Washington, the Seattle area, and the Pacific Northwest in general, there's so much stuff you can do outdoors. There's snowboarding, there's rock climbing, hiking, kayaking, stuff that I've never done in my life before. And when I came here, I fell in love with the potential to get involved in all these activities. So for me, it was more of a choice of the location was more important than the actual university. Just don't tell my faculty that.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so why go through that? Well, in essence, what we've just seen here is writing that is performed orally and orality performed orally. Okay, so you had something that was composed for a reader's eye. So here's what this looks like. Here's the script that Heather just read. So you'll notice when you look at this, there's all sorts of things going on from a typographic, from a script perspective that can help the reader understand the writer's intent. There are paragraph breaks, there are commas, there's italics, there's boldface, there's a whole range of different typographic elements. Okay? Now, those typographic elements, when we stand up to speak, are gone. Right? I can't speak in an italics. I can stand sideways, but that's stupid and no one would get what I was doing. Okay? So all those things are gone, but that doesn't mean that we don't have the capacity to provide that type of texture. Okay? So you would have noticed in these two, and I was listening as well, so when Heather was reading, those clauses were longer. Okay, they were just longer. Typically, naturally occurring oral discourse tends to be shorter phrases than written discourse. Why? Because we've got all sorts of grammatical rules that we impose upon some of that written language to make something that we say looks like a sentence. There are typically more hedging devices in spoken discourse, some more sort of, kind of. There's certainly more intensifiers typically in spoken discourse, and you even heard that in Danny. There's so many things to do. There's it's so very, very green here, so on and so forth. Those typically tend to cluster around that. But the larger issue is these are two different mediums. So we will see problems when you take something that was designed for the eye and simply try to perform it for the ear. Heather had the more challenging task here. Reading that text, which by the way is boring, and is designed to be usable but not hyper-usable. She has to stop, restart some paragraphs. She has to, even though we've got punctuation to help the reader figure out sort of what intonation should sound like in that sentence, it's going to misfire sometimes. So the intonation's not quite as it would be in naturally occurring speech. Okay? So the larger point here is we want to understand some of the very clear difference between communiques designed for the eye and communiques designed for the ear. Why is this? Because when we're delivering presentations for a live audience, we're working in this realm of oral. Our medium is speech. Take from writing what you can. Certainly we can use it to help us prepare, to help us understand. But when it comes time to stand up to speak, we need to be thinking more in this oral mode. Now in the next lecture, what we're going to do is talk about what these general understandings can do when we apply them to actual performance of speech.